Greetings. So, today we are going to be discussing my project, A Deadly Swarm. This is the ethics of automated warfighting technology. So, we're going to be using swarm and drones in general as our topics for this automated warfighting technology. We'll be primarily focused on flying drones and not any of the quickly developing ground drones. So, to encapsulate this, we'll go ahead and start our discussion talking about the technology that has gotten up to this point. So, the technology that we have is quickly developing into micro or mini drones that can be used in multiple ways. You can take a look at the graphic on the left-hand side. That'll show you the different capabilities of these drones in terms of kinetic operations, ISR, the ability to record ground teams and live streamed to command centers, and to perform search and recovery missions or launch and recovery for teams on the ground there, all to assist. So the technologies that we have rapidly expanded in capability, arguably to the point where our laws and our capability to use them ethically have run into conflict. So the dynamics of this warfare have influenced national discussions. We see real issues with targeting, especially in the Ukraine-Russian situation right now. And if we extrapolate that out into the possibility of swarm drones being utilized by Russia in the Ukraine example, we might have a very serious issue on our hands, especially with the payload capabilities of such things as the Reaper drones, for example. So this concept has the ability to open the new possibilities of warfare and of security. And this is going to be a later discussion for us in the slides to come. So, and a lot of this information is coming from Dinesh Mahan, writing for the Defense XP, the Indian Defense Network, which leads us into a quick segue that the countries that are developing this weaponry the quickest are the United States, China, Russia, and India. So this is going to be a brief outline of our discussion. And on to changing nature of warfare. So SWARM, this is an acronym for Smart Warfighting Array of Reconfigured Models. So in our discussion of this, we've discussed the micro and mini categories of these autonomously warfighting aerial vehicles. So the ability to revolutionize the way that we fight wars is something that can't be overstated. So the question is, how will we fight this war ethically? So given the nature of drones, for example, the swarm technology. So we can send out a swarm of these mini drones that will be hard to detect and hard to stop, with the ability to surveil and essentially perform these kinetic operations. Now, we don't fully understand how to utilize them fully, but we have the idea. And this tactical advantage for those who develop this technology first has the ability, the upper hand, to conduct these these ISR and kinetic operations. So the other things that are related to this issue are artificial intelligence and machine autonomy. So AI learning and the ability to make decisions real time utilizing this AI technology. So the rise of the swarm. So we have our first evidence of swarm deployments. 2018, Russian operators manning the extensive Air Force air defense network at Russia's Kamyam air base in western Syria spotted 13 incoming drones at low level. 2019, swarm missiles and drones successfully evaded Saudi's air defense and temporarily knocked out half of the kingdom's oil production. In 2020, Azerbaijan destroyed 200 Armenian military vehicles in the tactical battlefield area using coordinated armed drones and loitering munitions. So, with this information, extrapolate that out into, let's say, a discussion about knocking out an entire country's power grid, for example. So, who's to say that we couldn't knock out that power grid and, extrapolating that out even farther, knock out weapons capability, but also knocking out the ability for hospitals to do their work. So it's a natural casualty of war, but hundreds, thousands of people could lose their lives within minutes, just as a result of a possible EMP attack. So that raises the ethical question. How are we using this technology now, especially given the example that we spotted just above, quick-moving and potentially deadly swarm drones and irregular drones? So the ability to produce this material, low cost, low risk, on behalf of the army or military that's deploying this technology. So the very real possibility of coordinating a weapon of mass destruction utilizing one of these swarms is a very likely possibility. So how does the Air Force fit into this? So the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde, a DAF Vanguard program, is aligned to the Program Executive Officer for Weapons. Its original objective was to demonstrate networked, collaborative, and autonomous weapons by creating an integrated weapon system or systems where weapons autonomously work together to increase survivability and lethality. So this is a program that's being developed by the Air Force. So we've seen the capability of other countries to do what we plan on doing, essentially. So we're working on these integrated weapon systems to execute missions for these mini drones or mini or micro drones in order to deliver these payloads to a location to identify and defeat these targets. So the two ethical dilemmas that are raised by by these drones. So the first, fairly straightforward. Swarms are classified as WMDs. Should they be? The capability that as I previously mentioned, that the U.S. will be able to, not just the U.S., but the Air Force specifically, have the capability to, instead of sending our pilots, sending human operators or human agents to perform these actions, we send an autonomous aerial vehicle to deliver a payload of a weapon of mass destruction. So that leads to the ethical dilemma of taking the pilots out of the seats and putting a fully autonomous vehicle programmed to make that decision. How can we justify that? So international law is not currently, we have that currently defined, and we'll cover that a little bit later. But countries are reluctant at this point to push forward with international law on this issue. So, and of course, having new technology, no country is willing to give up that tactical advantage at this time. The other ethical issue is that countries that can't defend against these new weapons would be destined to lose the next war. From an ethical warfighting perspective, many lives would be lost with little to no risk on the part of the government sending these swarms or tactical drones. So the human interactions of the drones, pros and cons, obviously. Taking the human consideration out, human life as being human life of the pilot, the officer is being saved, but at what cost? The cost being the lives of those affected by, let's say, a missile strike conducted by one of these swarms, kinetic operation. So, advocates of swarm deployment. Again, we're covering the idea that human involvement in some of these missions reduce the number of military casualties, and we'd be able to receive, process, and react to information more quickly. So again, focusing on that ISR aspect of things, real-time benefit to battlefield command, or C2, command and control. Cost of these swarm drones are far less expensive and cost one human-operated combatant aircraft. So training one pilot is thousands and thousands of dollars for those individuals being trained, to the people who are training those individuals, as well as the aircraft, as well as the gas and the munitions, all go with that craft, as well as the maintenance of that aircraft. So far less expensive. So these would not be subject to the issues in terms of emotions, the emotions and judgments of the pilot. So we're taking the emotion out of the issue. So these drones can have, if AI can continue to be developed, can make battlefield decisions with little to no input, and could save lives that way. A lot of deliberation is often made from the combatant or the pilot to higher level leadership, and that sometimes can take time that could possibly cost more lives. So, and a lot of this comes down to the emotional stability for these warfighters, the emotional toll taking out of executing an enemy combatant. Sometimes takes a lot out of those warfighters, and so no-fly zones, protecting various geographical zones, that could be a game changer as well. There's articles out there right now that posing the question: should we have regular surveillance conducted by drones across U.S. borders, particularly against the U.S.-Mexican border? So, the detractors. So with semi-autonomous drones in use now, while drones can fly thousands of miles on their own, human pilots must still identify their targets and make the so-called kill decision. This is very much true. Even in the USAF's enlisted pilot program, for example, so these targets still need to be identified. Research needs to be done about these targets, and ultimately the decision is made currently by the enlisted and the officer team. So the human factor is still making those decisions. So the ethical problem here is that if we allow the human element to be taken out of it, what's the possibility that the AI could make the decision that a hospital, for example, that houses enemy combatants, also hosting innocent civilians, who's to say that that AI could make that risk assessment that more enemy casualties in fewer civilian casualties? That ethical problem comes up as well. So the decision to use missiles and kinetic operations to minimize casualties, but still causing those casualties, those civilian casualties. So we also cross that moral and ethical Rubicon of deciding to create and use autonomous weapons that can attack and kill people on their own. So that's just as what we said before. We don't have the laws that really govern that at the moment. So we're also talking about the reliability and the predictability. So these drones can be hacked. And also there's currently weapons that are out there right now that can jam the signal and affect the operation of drones. So that is consideration also. So operators may struggle to also contain or control these swarms, these drones. The risks of misperceptions are high, leading conflict escalation. Non-combat swarms might accidentally intrude into foreign airspace. So this is a big concern also. Unintentional war. I believe this has even happened before, where a drone has crossed into enemy airspace or hostile airspace, and this could inevitably lead to a international conflict or international issue. So limited behaviors to alter the behavior of a swarm after launch, and the reliance on indirect control methods, especially in the case of emergent swarms, can lead to adverse incidents, crashes, fratricides, and even casualties. So the Air Force's ethical position on this: since no world consensus has been reached, killer drones and advanced technology will continue to be developed. So in my notes, I've actually discussed part of the issue that we face here. So the international law lags behind, but the technology continues to advance. This poses the ethical question. Do we need to slow things down before such issues like the WMD, which I mentioned before, are employed? The permanent surveillance issue. This has been a highly contested issue, especially in the United States, whether we can keep drones in the air 24/7. The Air Force, again, has the ability to man with enlisted or officer personnel 24/7 surveillance. What is the ethical nature of that, especially if this technology could be used against Americans also? In the presidency of Barack Obama, there was the issue of the blowback against that presidency for taking out a U.S. citizen or having a kinetic operation against a U.S. citizen. So the additional ethical issue here is that by utilizing machines to do our warfighting for us, in some instances, will that make us less anxious about going to war? Should we use these items sparingly? So that is another ethical question to be raised. So another issue is the AI learning, targeting, and striking. So if we employ this artificial intelligence about targeting, learning patterns and targeting and then striking, all of that could be coded. And thus, could governments simply throw up their hands and say, well, it was a glitch, or, if someone actually did hack, like the Chinese, for example, could hack into a U.S. drone and then strike a target, which, that's another consideration. what are ethics about, teaching this AI? Do we have specific stop gaps? Do we have specific contingencies for this? It's built within the coding, for example. And then finally, just to kind of bring it home, the ability of a Class 3 aircraft, and we're talking about larger drones at this point, that could still find itself within a swarm. These Class 3 aircraft, which weighs more than 600 kilograms, typically they have a payload capacity of several hundred kilos. So imagine multiple drones in that swarm that we discussed before, having that payload and then striking key targets, and it could operate on a 24-hour schedule and get that 300 kilometers per hour. So we could, the whole world is subject to attack at this point. So that is another ethical consideration. Do we want to have that global threat of war at any time? Technically, we have that right now with international ballistic missiles, IBMs, but this is a consideration, especially for those mini and micro drones, which are hard to detect, fast-moving, and cheap to deploy and create. So the conclusion, because the U.S. adversaries are engaged in swarm and R&D at an accelerated pace, and in some cases have advanced into deploying swarms, in the example of Russia specifically, it is imperative that the Air Force continue their efforts to swiftly develop this capability, this program. But development of offensive swarm technology should be met and perhaps exceeded by research into defense against swarm attacks. One such device might be a wide-angled EMP. Now, we discussed that a little bit earlier, but that's another ethical issue. Knocking out the electrical grid for an entire country. Even in the U.S., that is a serious consideration for our military leadership. That would disable the swarm's electronic systems. And there's also a handheld tool that would perform this function as well. So just as the Air Force has convened experts in developing swarm technology, Air Force leadership should also call in ethics and legal experts to develop a comprehensive guidebook as to the use of swarms. The Air Force should include experts in the educational, religious, contractor, and social science fields. So as we discussed, some of the research that I've done focused on that religious aspect of things, the ethics of this sort of warfighting. For example, from a Christian standpoint, being the tip of the sword, as it were, what religious ramifications does this have? The societal influence that drones would have on a populace, terrorizing a populace, and there's also discussion of the creation of terrorists as a result of these swarm attacks or kinetic operations. So we could see this swarms regularly appearing in combat zones, possibly to augment or be the artillery to soften targets. Guidance provided by the experts should be detailed as to define as many scenarios as possible. Swarm designers should place a priority on a kill switch with disabled drones that begin to display unintended activities. Operators should be trained on recognizing swarm behavior, and that is consistent with swarm's mission. Then have the capability to disable drones and then abort the mission. So that is going to be the larger discussion that we have here. The references are also included in the notes section below. So that is our discussion for today.